Index funds, mutual funds, ETFs. These are three different ways that you can invest your money in the stock market. And when it comes to investing, your goal is to maximize your returns, how much money you make, and reduce the risk of how much money you lose. Say you do some research and decide the best investment of all time would be to buy Apple, and you put all your money into their stock. Well, the first few years go very well, the company continues to grow, but then they invented the new iPhone 20, and the customers don't like it. It's a new product, it changes the whole business. People don't like the company anymore. Their business is going to tank. They're not going to have as much sales, money coming in. It's going to hurt them. That's going to hurt your money, and if that's all you have invested, your money is going to go down significantly. Now, you could invest in multiple companies because that would reduce the risk of how much money you would lose, but that takes significant time and research of analyzing each company, figuring out how to diversify and get the best returns out of them. Yet alone, getting a good return on your own is incredibly difficult. In fact, studies have shown that a blindfolded monkey throwing darts at a list of companies would do just as well as ones carefully selected by experts. Now, because stock picking is extremely difficult and you want your money to grow over time and work for you, reducing the risk of losing money, there is a better option for you that I'm going to cover in this video called investment funds. And before I get into the details and differences of mutual funds, index funds, and ETFs, it's best that you understand investment funds. That is what these funds are, and they are a gathering of a bunch of companies put into one investment. This is convenient for you because it's going to be so much easier to invest into 100 companies because it's all in one. You don't have to buy them all separately. An investment fund simply does it all for you by giving you exposure to many companies, reducing that risk of losing your money. And what's even better is that certain ones have historically proven to build tremendous wealth for investors. Now, although this concept applies to index funds, mutual funds, and ETFs, there are differences between them that if you do not understand, it can literally cost you. So let's first talk about mutual funds, and they were the first to be created. They're also known as actively managed funds. And a simple example to help you understand this is, say that there's a fund that has 5 stocks in this. Now, mutual funds usually have way more. But for this case, let's just say that those companies are Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, and Google. When it comes to these companies, because this is in a mutual fund, it's an actively managed fund, this is controlled by a professional money manager or a fund manager who actually gets to decide what investments stay within the fund. So when you invest into a mutual fund, you're leaving your money up to the fund manager so that they can pick the best stocks, have the best returns, and allocate those types of investments so that you have the reduced risk but maximize your returns. And it's all up to that fund manager and their decisions. So if this fund manager performs terribly, then you're going to lose a lot of money, but if they do great, you're going to get a lot of money. Let's say the fund manager from our previous example doesn't want Google anymore. They can actually get rid of it, take it out of the fund, then it's diversified differently, and then they could possibly get a different company like, say, Johnson & Johnson instead. So any stocks that these fund managers like, they are going to buy and keep into this fund, and that is because their goal is to outperform the stock market and make as much money as possible. And when you invest in the mutual funds, because they're doing the work for you, it is going to cost you when you invest your money with them. So they are going to take out, on average, about 2% of your money, and that is annually. If you were to invest $10,000 into a mutual fund, that means that $200 of that would be going into the manager's pocket in the first year only. I say only because if you keep your money invested in this mutual fund and it grows and compounds over time, that means that bigger chunks of your money every year are going to be taken out and given to these managers. And the worst part about this is if the mutual fund goes down in value and you are losing money, every single year that you own that mutual fund, no matter what happens to the performance of it, you still have to pay out 2% annually. And a crazy fact for you is the S&P Dow Jones Indices, which is a world's leading resource for benchmark statistics. Their research shows that 90% of actively managed funds underperform the overall stock market. And my favorite one of all is Ray Dalio, who quote unquote says trying to time the stock market is harder than competing in the Olympics. Now, there are great athletes out there in the world and there are great fund managers, but to get access to their funds so they invest for you with their skills, the ones that have historically done very well and have become very wealthy because of it, such as Ray Dalio, it is expensive, and typically it's going to be big money like $500,000 to be able to invest in the fund. In fact, the New York Times covered information on Ray Dalio's fund, who is a legendary fund manager who's done very well in his time. They state that it generally requires their clients to have at least $7.5 billion in assets to put their money into the fund. And many of the investors pay $500,000 to $4 million in fees a year. Now, I'm telling you, that is beyond big money. So as I discussed, a 2% fee on the average mutual fund is extremely high. Mutual funds are not cheap. And that is why the founder of Vanguard, Jack Bogle, in 1975, thought of a new approach that would be much cheaper for an average investor to do, and that would be index fund investing. So the broad idea of how index funds work is that instead of a mutual fund, actively managed fund that has a fund manager, a person that controls the investments and does all the work, now you're using a computer with a criteria and an algorithm that is much cheaper to operate, which is why index funds are a low-cost option. A simple definition in the financial world of index is a list of securities, such as stocks or bonds. And what this does is represent and measure the performance of a particular market. So when you invest into an index fund, you are tracking a specific market and taking ownership in that index. A popular index is the S&P 500, which resembles 500 of the top publicly traded companies on the US stock exchanges. This typically refers to the overall performance of the US economy, and each index has a provider, which is the company that creates the index using data and specific criteria. For example, the provider of the S&P 500, which is the company that created it and manages it, is the Standard & Poor's. And because the function of the Standard & Poor's is to manage and control the index that it contains, you are not going to be able to buy the S&P 500 within the Standard & Poor's company. That is because in order to buy an index, you need to buy it through a fund. And other companies like Fidelity, Vanguard, Charles Schwab, all provide the option for you to do so. Think of those companies as the middleman, where they are getting the information, the index, and the data from the company Standard & Poor's to you, the investor, the ability to actually invest in it. Now, when it comes to buying index funds, typically it has the name index fund in the actual fund that you want to purchase. So if you want the S&P 500 index fund, if you look at Fidelity, it will say the Fidelity 500 index fund. And on Charles Schwab, it would be the Schwab S&P 500 index fund. On Vanguard, it would be listed as the Vanguard 500 index fund. And if you are new to index funds, I will leave a video up here and a link in the description below as well to an entire video I made covering that. It is on Fidelity, but if you want to learn more about it as a whole, you can get all the information in that video. And the cost of these funds comes down to the expense ratio. So for the Fidelity 500, tracks the S&P 500 index, we are looking at a 0.015% expense ratio. Literally grains of rice compared to high-fee mutual funds. What that means is that a $100,000 investment in this index fund would be $15. But if it was the average mutual fund, you would pay a fee of $2,000 every year. Big difference. It's important to understand that an index fund is categorized as a type of mutual fund. So when you go to purchase an actual index fund, that is what you will see. And when you research funds, you can check out their prospectus, which gives you much more detail about the fund. So looking at the S&P 500 index fund through Vanguard, their principal investment strategy says that the fund employs an indexing investment approach designed to track the performance of the Standard & Poor's 500 index. And an example of a mutual fund, the principal investment strategy would state the fund investment advisor right here. So actively managed funds, which are mutual funds, and passively managed funds, which are index funds, are both a type of mutual fund, and that means that they both can only be traded once per day. That is when the market closes. They do not have a real-time stock price fluctuation throughout the day. They have one price that goes in at the market close. So if it's on a Saturday, it'd be Monday after the close. If it's Tuesday during the market, it would be Tuesday when the market closes. Your transaction would go through. But this is crucial to understand, that mutual funds and index funds could only be traded once per day, because that was a big driver for the creation of ETFs in the 1990s. ETFs stands for Exchange Traded Funds. So an alternative to index funds is ETFs, and a specialty with this is you can buy or sell the fund throughout the day just like you would with regular stocks. They have a real-time price fluctuation, unlike mutual funds and index funds where they're only updated with the price once per day. Now, the expense ratios for index funds and ETFs are roughly similar. If we look at the S&P 500 through Vanguard, the VOO, which is the ETF, has an expense ratio of 0.03%, while the Vanguard 500 index fund has an expense ratio of 0.04%. So as an overall view, index funds and ETFs are roughly similar, they just have a few trading differences. In my personal honest opinion, I think that it would be wise to take part of your full-time income, put that into index funds automatically. This is really good for retirement and also saving and investing for your future. I would recommend that. And if you have a side hustle, a side job, I would then recommend using that money to invest into ETFs. It's a lot easier, more liquidable so that you can take it out of the account much quicker if you need it. But I would recommend having a structured plan and really sticking to it. So an overall guide to each of these funds is that a mutual fund is an actively managed fund that is controlled by a person, a professional called a fund manager, who decides what investments in the fund should be in the fund. And an index fund is a passively managed fund, which is a type of mutual fund, but instead of being human operated, it is controlled by a computer with an algorithm that tracks companies that resemble particular markets and at a much lower cost. But the main difference is that ETFs are traded just like stocks. Now, as far as which ones are better, that is a personal opinion because some say this over that, but to me, index funds and ETFs are a solid approach because they come at a much lower cost. This doesn't necessarily mean that mutual funds are a bad idea because some of them are going to outperform the stock market and give you great returns. But there is no guarantee that they're going to give you even a decent return on your investment. It could be negative, you could lose money, and on top of that, they're charging you annual fees every year that are not cheap. And if you believe that the US economy is going to continue to grow, the S&P 500 index is a great option. So that means that you could actually buy it as an index fund or an ETF. Both options are great choices, and I highly recommend that you start today. With that being said, if you have any other questions or want me to make any other kind of videos, let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, it helps me out a ton. Subscribe to the channel if you found value in this money talk content that I will be continuing to make.